would run on the beach of Shell Beach, and they would throw up and a cleansing, another traditional that was protect the canoe and the paddlers from people who might jinx the canoe. The elders would ensure my teacher and the crew would wash the canoe off using cedar limbs and needles. It was a very traditional culture, but the mermaid would pull off a win year after year. And that was a little speech that I made about my teacher. And he spent many years teaching me about going down to the ocean and washing myself off in the ocean and bathing. And I'm incredibly grateful for those times. And so each day when we'd start our day before we would carve, we would say a prayer into the ocean. We would start in the canoe shed and we would start carving, and we would always make sure that we were full. So we would stop and have our coffee breaks and eat, but always remembering to be calm and humble. And yes, that's a little bit of my introduction, and so we can start a little bit of the pictures, and I'll go through them. So this is a model that's created, and so just like the model that's in front of me here, each line that's on that canoe is comes from a family line. And so that canoe, those shapes that you see are just like a totem pole, and how each line represents the family. And my teacher, his great grandmother came from Snuneymuxw, and so they would come to Gabriola Island every summer, and they would hunt and fish here, and they brought their children, and he talked about the generations that this went on for. And so I got a little video. So I have a little video of the different styles. And so each canoe, these bowls represent the journey canoes. And you can see that all my bowls are floating. And so when I first started carving, my teacher would have me, I finished many canoes, but also had him, he taught me how to make my bowls float and work just like the regular canoe would. This tree here, I was contacted by a school to make a canoe, or a little canoe for children. And so this is a 14-foot canoe that I started right down on Shell Beach, and then I finished in Snuneymuxw. And so it was finished within the oh yeah, there's a little video. So there's the first cuts that are made. And so when I'm doing my first cuts, that's kind of outlining what I'm doing, and then I do for the full cut. And so journey canoes are have been used for centuries in fishing and from traveling from one place to another. This canoe I carved in the forest, and I walked the lands, and my elders told me to, any tree you see, it's yours. Fall it and carve it where it lays. If you gift me with this canoe, you can walk my lands and take any canoe that you wish from this time forward. So this is the starting process. I just felled this tree in this picture maybe an hour before, and then I started carving right there that day. This is early in the morning. This is a single canoe. It's a racing canoe. And just like my teacher, how he would get into the canoe first thing in the morning as the sun was coming up and paddle all the way to couch and paddle back. And then he would start his run. A strength from another time and space. This is before I started chipping it out. This is a time-lapse video of me chipping that canoe out.
How long does it take to chip the whole canoe?
So I can do it in about a day or two, depending on the strength.
Oh, something bad happened. Technical difficulties. Hang on. Where's my cursor?
There it is.
There it is. Let's get rid of that. Got to be careful what you press.
Awesome. And now this is, so we flip it back over and we use a traditional adze to do those final shapes. And so the adze that I'm using has been passed down within the family for generations. And so my papa used it for his career, and then he had it after working 2 years with him within the canoe shed. His whole canoe shed was full of canoes. And over 2 years, as I worked with him, he asked me to come and live with him. And so I lived with him within that. I lived in the canoe shed. And every day, 7 days a week, I worked on his canoes. And after 2 years, he said, all the tools that you see here, and he pulled a log up and he said, this log and everything you see here is yours to carry on my legacy. And I started. So we'll go through the many canoes that I had. These are two separate canoes. The one on the left, I carved with my elders, his brother. The one on the right was my very first canoe. I spent 1 year. I started in June and I finished it in June of the following year. And I worked on it 7 days a week. And I can carve a canoe now in 5 weeks. So I've gained a lot of strength and a lot of knowledge, and I'm able to carry on his talents. He could carve a canoe in 3 days. So I'm working up to that point now. So the canoe on your very left of your screen, that canoe, my papa, he brought me down to he said, Beau, we're gonna carve a canoe today. You carry me down the beach now. And then so I took him down the beach. And this was 6 months before he passed. And we carved that canoe together. And it's emotional even speaking about it, because he had such strength, and I love them very much. And so the middle strip canoe there that you see was my very first strip canoe, and it took me 2 months to carve. And then the canoe on the far right, I finished that 2 years ago. So I've produced quite a few strip canoes in my time, and I've been carving dugout canoes now for close to a decade. And my very first dugout canoe, even though I worked on it for a whole year, I gifted it away.
Wow.
And so that was hard, not coming from those teachings and being trained in that way.
Do you mind talking a little bit about the process for a strip canoe?
Absolutely. And so you start from the shear line, which is what you see on the top, and you work your way to the bottom. And so finding the right strips for the strip canoe can be difficult, because the more coarse the grain, the harder it is for those to make those shapes. And the more shape that it has, the more likely you have to steam that canoe. And so each strip will have to be steamed over the frame and bent into place. And so, as you can see in those photos, that I use yellow cedar on the top. And that's my own design that I've created. And my teacher would talk about balance, about male and female. And so I felt that to have yellow cedar on top, where you can, many of the paddlers would paddle once and bang their paddle along the top of the shear line, and it acts as a drum. And so when they're coming into shore, they will do that sometimes. They'll paddle once and bang on it, and paddle once and bang, and you can hear it right across the whole bay. And so this is the very first canoe that I built after my papa had passed. And so when he passed, we locked the canoe shed, and 2 months had passed. And I knew that I had to come back and I had to keep working. So I carved this canoe in 1 month. And the seat design was changed. I had a vision of changing the seat designs. And so it turned out a very beautiful canoe. And again, it's the training that I received here on Gabriola. I went to Silva Bay Wooden Boat School and learned fine joinery. I had joinery skills before that, but I was just young and still learning. And so I took the many years of training that I spent here on Gabriola and used them with my teacher. And so this summer, the Snuneymuxw Forestry, they gifted us with 2 logs. The log on your left is the finished product of that log. And the photo of the right is me trying it out for the very first time. As you see, I'm coming ashore in that photo, but I've been gifted many teachings about the traditions of racing and what you need to do, the strength that you need to do to race. But I don't carry that. I can see me kind of struggling in that photo, and but I never tipped. I've been carving for some time, and so this is previous to those previous photos of that log on the beach. And so I was asked by a school to carve them a canoe. And so this is the finished product of that log. And so there's even a couple kids in the background there. So they asked me to carve them a canoe, and then a week before I was to have this gifting ceremony with Patrick Alec, they asked me to paint on that canoe. So I kind of went home and was really struggling with, I know I have to design this canoe. And so I came back the next day and put those elements on it. And so the crescents that you see there is that represents power. And I put 2 fins on it. And their logo is a frog. So I took their own logo and I put Coast Salish elements within it. But the paint that I was using was very thick, and it was hard to paint with. So that was kind of my learning curve, because that was one of my first paintings that I had done on a full-scale canoe. And so just starting with Dave Bodaly, we've been, we were gifted in the spring a log that was suitable for small canoes. It had great conch within it. And so I believe in that time, we've made at least 10 canoes. And so this is a photo of all those canoes all lined up. And so this is Fred Anderson's paintwork on my canoes. So I was, in the beginning of this year, he commissioned me to make 3 canoes for him. You can see his artwork is just stunning. And
could you tell us what's on the canoes?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, Sisuro on the end, I can see it there. The Sisuro is a Kwakwakwa cultural creature that has a head on each end of it. And it's actually, my ancestors come from Village Island, and that's our logo, is the Sisuro, the double-headed Sisuro. And it's often drawn there with the heads of different types on each end of it.
Okay.
This one looks like a wolf here on this end, with the teeth on it. We always say in our culture, if you look into the eyes of the artwork done on each one of them, if you look in our cultural way, if you look really carefully or look really hard into the eye, you'll see the artist, because the artist only curves that same kind of eye. They only draw that same eye, and each one of them are different.
And is this a wolf?
Yeah.
And a thunderbird?
Eagle.
Eagle.
Eagle or a thunderbird on the other side.
Okay. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a different shape on this one.
So true. Yeah, the head is really a lot of detail.
And those are those same 3 canoes before they were painted. And so Tim Alfred commissioned me to make him this canoe. And so I carved this canoe with the feeling of having someone of his stature ordering a canoe is an immense, I was just so grateful that he had such great talent, and that he reached down and wanted me to carve him a canoe. I was just like, oh, wow, what an honor to create something for him. And so I made 2 little paddles to go with it. And it's just a little slide of the canoes that I made last year. And so I've been training for some time and getting better, like as my teacher told me to get better within every canoe I make should have those same lines.
Why is that?
And I make all my little paddles to scale. And so those crescents that you see represents the power. And then the red within the circle represents our physical cells in our eye.
There it is. Technical difficulty. Oh, that's the same one.
Hi, Scott.
So please send some questions.
Yes, please. If you have any questions for Beau about the canoes that you saw, the techniques, his plans for the future, please put them in the chat box, and I will read them out for him to answer. And a question that I have is, Do you teach children and youth the art of carving?
I do, and so there's, as I mentioned, there's so many protocols that go within that, and so we always start off our teachings with teaching them in the proper protocol to leave their energies at the door, and so when they come in, we like to start off with sometimes a song or sometimes a walk through the woods, and we talk about the cedar trees and why we never just go into the forest and cut a tree down. There is always a reason why we're taking that tree. And so we always try to relay those teachings before we start carving.
Can I add to that? The work that we had done over on Gabriola here with the school, a few years ago, we went to the commons and had the children come in and see the trees, a cedar tree, and we gathered around the cedar tree. And I got the little kids to press on the tree to feel the sponge, to feel the strength of the tree, but also feel that the tree does have a little bit of give in it. And so we got some good photos of the children around the tree. And then after we did that part, we walked to the school grounds, and I had the kids search in the backyard of the school to find a cedar tree there and gather around and see if they could give a little bit of a story of what they learned from the cedar tree over at the commons. So it's a really neat interaction with the kids. And I'm hoping to do this more with Beau in the future, have him come over and work with some of the kids in that area. So really exciting to teach the younger generations, because they are the future generations. And if we can have a good positive impact on them, they will carry that forward.
We do have a question from the audience. Do you always use cedar?
Yes, we do. And so the reason why we use red cedar is, as I described, it's very absorbent. And so red cedar especially has oils that within it that repel water. And so our ancestors, they didn't have modern techniques like fiberglass. And so when they carved a canoe, the bottom of the canoe would always be face grain, and the sides of the canoe would be edge grain. And the reasons for that is because on a face grain, there's not very many grains for those waters to get into. They would also take flame and torch the canoe so that it would singe and hold in those, it would close all the fibers within that canoe. They would also boil sap and put sap all over their canoes from Douglas fir. And that sap, when it was still sticky, they would put it in the water and it would harden.
Can you switch on the light so they can see a picture?
They can see actually.
Oh, can they?
Yeah.
Okay, can you see it? Okay, so there's a picture here of the canoes when we were in the tribal journeys, and what each of the canoes will represent is the family, the canoe family, and they will have their own design according to the families that are all involved and the input from each person. Similar to what Beau had for the school, where he created the design for the children. Can you see that okay on the camera?
Right up to the camera.
Oh, okay, yeah, bring it right up to it.
How does that look?
And this was in 2017 while I was traveling with the Tribal Journeys in Campbell River. And I was honored to be a photographer for that. And so I got some beautiful pictures of the front bows of the canoes to show the information of what each canoe looked like. So good.
Awesome. Yeah, so that was, so here in Snuneymuxw, we usually only carve pegs, Snuneymuxw cedar canoes. And so I just said red cedar canoes. And so the reason why is, like I was mentioning about the red cedar repelling the water. And the more north you go, I've heard of canoes being carved out of yellow cedar as well. But they're usually, yellow cedar is more of a intricate carving where they do more intricate work, like rattles and other things like that.
And a red cedar represents, Pei represents the female, and the yellow canoe or the yellow cedar represents male, called the Snuneymuxw. And if we carve a canoe, we'll carve it out of red cedar. If we carve the paddles out of red cedar, they would break because we have to have that balance. So we would carve the paddles always out of yellow cedar, and they have a different strength to them also. That
So we
might
have
raise more questions.
Sorry, Dave. We have a question from Libby Gunn. She said it looked like the first cut that you made for the basic canoe shape was the heart of the tree. Is that correct?
Yes, when I start, going back to the face grain, they call it, and then the edge grain. So when I'm reading a canoe and I'm looking, I have the base of the butt of the canoe. I'm looking on what side of the sun that tree had. And so if it was in the north side of that tree or the south side of that tree. And so this north side of that tree, it barely sees any light. And so the south side of the tree is in sunlight all year round, and it grows very fast. And what that shows on when you're looking at the butt of a log, the grains are very big and open. And so I want the bottom of the canoe to have very tight grain. And so I always use the north side of that. The tree is on the bottom of that canoe, and the head of the canoe is on the north side of the tree, or the south side of the tree. And so usually when you're looking at the butt of a log, it looks very lopsided. You'll actually see the ring closer to one side, and it's closer to the north side. And the north side of the tree has got almost twice the size of the north side of the tree. So when I was cutting through, I square off and I'm trying to remove all the sapwood. And so, yes, it would look like I'm cutting into the very core of that tree, but I'm actually trying to remove that core. The core of the tree will actually be on the inside of that canoe, and I'll dig it all out. And so because I'm trying to get face grain on the bottom of that canoe so that all the grains are very tight and parallel with one another.
Okay, excellent. We have another question. I'm going to skip over a question because this one goes along with what you're talking about. Okay. Frida would like to know if you take logs only from the forest that you mentioned at the beginning.
Do I take logs from the forest? Well, yeah, so my papa taught me about being resourceful. And at one time, the logs within our territories were so plentiful that we were able to go into the forest and remove trees that were binding one another. But now, my papa, he would always tell me to be, if there's an opportunity to take a log that's already been fallen, or if the wind has fallen a tree, to use that log, and so they give it life again. And so I've, for many years while living on the beach, every November when the storms come, trees would fall into that Cowichan River and would wash up ashore, and we would carve them right there on the beach. So that kind of answers that question.
Yeah. Lynn would like to know, when will the next races take place and where?
Excellent question. Thank you. And so this last summer, all the journey and all the summer games have been canceled because of the recent pandemic. And so we're hoping that everything clears up and we can go back to our ceremonies and our summer games and travel journeys again.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
That's always good, a good question to ask about that, because sometimes people have driven by and happen to see some canoes in the water and was wondering what's going on. Well, we have schedules that go on all the time within the Coast Salish area for this area, and even into the Washington State area. The families from there have races down there, different areas. And so up until this past summer, we've had them for over 100 years. We've been having races every year. And it's been a real honor as a photographer myself to document those for the community and for public events. A few years ago in 2015, we had a showing of the canoe history in the Cowichan Museum. And if anyone ever got a chance to go to the Cowichan Museum and see that, it was very informative, because it was also the first showing that was ever done in bilingual. It was done in Ho'okaminam and in English. And anyone who has an iPhone, they could do a scan of the write-up, and they could listen on their phone, and the elder would give an interpretation in Ho'okaminam of what was happening on that tribal or in that canoe race. And so it was really neat to see. So.
I'd just like to put it out there again. I put it in the chat box, but if you do have any questions, just go to the chat and type them up, and I'll relay them to Beau and Dave.
Let's see. Yeah.
So the Tribal Journeys is one that where a main part of my work is doing, is traveling with them. And these two canoes in this photo here, I'll get Carol to hold it closer, and then you can see it. I can see it clear. But this was in 2009. I traveled with Kwamut Lalem Child and Family Services, and the youth carved on this canoe with the elder in the front there, my cousin Florence, and they carved on that canoe, and then they pulled on that canoe all the way to Seattle. And their departing point from here was right in Staminas at the reserve, right in the area where Beau's grandfather worked at. And so it was really neat to work with those children. We had 17 of them, and they all pulled on that canoe for 14 days to Seattle, to Bainbridge Island. So.
What's the farthest that you have canoed? The longest trip that you've taken by canoe?
I've paddled with, when I first launched a canoe, it was a tribal journey canoe in 2014, I believe. And we paddled all the way to Cowichan. And so that was the first time that canoe had been put in the water since it'd been healed. And that was the first time I had ever had been inside a journey canoe before. And it was such a powerful feeling to feel all those kids from Kwamut Lalem pull, and you could just feel. And we had a drummer at the very front keeping us all in rhythm while we paddled, and it was a very emotional experience, and I just loved it. And so that was a teaching that I got, that there was in 1827. Over 500 canoes all the way from Saanich all the way up here to Mudge Island, and they would all pull together, and they came to Snuneymuxw and had a big potlatch, and then they went over to Fraser River, all paddling as one. And to imagine 500 canoes in those waters, and over 1,000 pullers, and they'd land into the Fraser River. And there were stories of the people in Fraser River, and they would watch the canoes come in. And one day, 2 canoes, the next day, 3 canoes, some days 15 canoes pulling in up the Fraser River.
Wow.
And how grateful they were that family and relatives were joining with them. And then they would all harvest from the Fraser River.
Very powerful.
Oh, it's from another time and space when everything in the world was theirs. There was no grocery stores or Tim Hortons or Starbucks. And
no Starbucks, what?
And all the resources were so plentiful that when the fish would run, the sound of it would be deafening. And you wouldn't actually be able to, you could climb all the way to the top of Mount Benson and you could still hear those herring run. And,
Mhm. So a little bit of a thought on the canoes that I had the experience with myself, and that was a good question that someone asked. When I traveled with the tribal journeys, I've traveled with over a dozen times with the canoe journeys. And I started back in 97 when I was with them. But in 2001, I was asked to be a photographer for Chief Frank Nelson to travel with his canoe called the Snuneymuxw. And because there was no roads traveling from Alert Bay to Campbell River, they asked if I would go onto the canoe. So our first pull was from Alert Bay, and our support boat said they were running out of gas and they were going to go and get gas in a little close area there. And so we started pulling south. And I guess we wondered what happened to our boat after 2 hours and 3 hours and 4 hours, and found out later that they had ran out of gas before they got to the gas station. So we finally, when they came back to us to give us support and allow us to take a break, it was 5.5 hours we had been on this canoe. The ladies that were on the canoe, some of them had to go to the washroom badly, but they flagged down a canoe, a whale watching boat, to come over to our canoe, and they came over. And so our Chief Frank Nelson sang a song to the people on the boat while the women were able to go over and use their washroom facilities on that support, on the whale watching boat. But it was a neat experience for us to travel on the ocean, because anyone who's ever been in that area of the water of the Johnson Bight, it's a very open area and the water is moving through there quite quickly. But off in the distance, I remember seeing may have been a sperm whale, or one of these huge whales is way bigger than our canoe was, but we seen it breach and come right out of the ocean and splash back in. But it was just such a powerful experience to be traveling as a canoe family on that ocean there. So neat times to remember, some neat photos.
Excellent. We have quite a few questions now. And I'm going to skip around a bit because there was one that related to one of the photographs I held up. Jennifer was asking that the canoes in the picture looked considerably larger and had greater width than the ones we saw earlier. With the loss of so many old growth forests, is it still possible to find trees big enough to make canoes that size?
It is, but it's every day it becomes harder as there's many logging companies. That's kind of a political question, but there's still very few old growth trees still standing today, and they're logging them at an alarming rate because they know that laws are changing and they're trying to stop that. And so the companies that are still logging them today are frantically trying to clear as much land as they can before those laws change. And so they're just recently I heard that they had fallen 60,000 old growth logs, and that was just on the west coast. And now they're on the east coast here, and they're logging just outside of Alert Bay and places like that. So there's very few left on the island, but there is still some. And so I'm hoping that one day I'd be considered to be carving a canoe of that stature. And so I'm currently carving an old growth cedar log that's 40 feet long. And this is just a tremendous honor to make that canoe. It was started and then it wasn't finished, so I was asked to finish. So I'm just so grateful, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to, people will see that canoe and will get access to more logs, and I'll be able to carry that on.
Yeah, you know, Before she go on the next question, I take that as an opportunity to advertise where we're doing these canoe carvings at. Our studio is the Red Barns up at Bevan Park. Anyone's been up at Bevan Park, is the Red Barn is where our weaving studio is at, and that's where we teach the classes of weaving. And right next to it is the larger one where we're doing the canoe carving. So please keep in contact with Carol if anyone's interested in coming over sometime and get contacts, and maybe sometime even come over and take one of my classes of cedar weaving, because we want to try and get the word out, as seems to be a lot of interest in it. So we're really honored for these times to share that knowledge of it. Thank you.
Rita has a question. Can you say something about the different qualities of strip canoes versus dugouts?
Absolutely. And so all the grain is one in a dugout canoe, and it has great power because of all the energy that goes into it, that love that you put into it. Every day you speak kind words to that canoe, you feed that canoe and our ancestors. And when you build a strip canoe, it's a far more Western style of woodworking, where each strip has been run through a router and very processed. And so they can be lighter, but they're also balanced differently than a dugout canoe. I can put a strip canoe together in 3 days if I have all the frame and everything all lined up and all of the strips cut out. It can be a very quick process. And so, and you have no connection to that cedar, because I typically go out into the forest and find a log that's either needs to be taken down because it's binding another tree, or the creator has already picked it and the wind has fallen that tree down. And so you get a real connection to the materials or the mediums that you're using. Whereas if you're producing a strip canoe, you can go to the store and buy that red cedar, and each strip could be coming from a different tree. And so it can be quite almost an ensemble of energy that's going together and becoming one. And so
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Libby would like to know, have there ever been women canoe makers?
I believe so. Trying to remember her name.
Culture, and my ancestry also from the north. A very famous lady was named Ellen Neal, and she had carved many totem poles and had worked on canoes, but it's not as common. But if women are interested, we're willing to teach them, because that barrier is coming down, where it was designated a man's work before. Sometimes they say that the weaving was designated a woman's work, but it's not. It's where the artist sees what the artist can see, and where people are willing. And if ladies are interested, please bring your name forward. We'd love to bring that skill out in someone. They may have that and maybe the next famous carver. We don't know.
Donald would like to know, where is the best place to see some examples of canoes?
Yeah. At my shop currently, I have, like I was mentioning, that 40-foot dugout tribal journey canoe. And I also have multiple singles. And I carved a canoe this summer, and I have it on display over on Sassuchen Island, formerly known as Newcastle. And so if you have a tour with Dave and I over on Sassuchen, or at our shop at Bowen Park, or Bevan Park, sorry, you can see the different styles of canoes, and because we have single racers right up to the tribal journey.
And I can clarify a little bit more when someone was saying the question about they look considerably wider than canoes. The canoes that Beau mostly carves here that we are showing in the slides were called Coast Salish racing canoes. And some of them weren't steamed as much as a larger canoe. The large canoe that we have at the shop that will be steamed will expand quite a bit on the side, as many of the canoes in the photo I shared with have happened. They've been steamed open, some of them, to quite a bit wider, and the canoe is 35 to 40 feet long, and then when it's steamed open, it can hold considerable amount more people. Although nowadays there's a lot of the canoes are fiberglass, so they're built into that wide shape. When they are steamed, they're no longer flat on the bottom because it's caused it, the width of it will cause the ends to lift up. And you can see on the small model here how it does have a bit of a tip to the end of it. So then that would maybe answer a little bit more of the question someone had about the images. So.
Could you talk a little bit more about, I'm very curious about the steaming of the canoe. How do you steam a canoe?
And so that was one of my first teachings about when I started carving. We had a tribal journey come in, and it had just been cut with an Alaskan sawmill and just kind of grinded down, and it was probably 18 inches thick all the way around. It was just almost still a big block of wood. And so we had to take it right down to 1.5 inches on the bottom and on the sides. And once we had taken it down to that thinness, you could start to feel that canoe wanting to move. And so what we did was we filled that canoe, and my teacher taught me how to steam a canoe in a traditional way. And so we had a big fire, and we got the earth very, very hot. And we had a bonfire there for well over a day. And we would add green wood to that fire so that they didn't actually produce flames. It just produced big coals. And so we filled that fire pit with rocks, and those rocks got red hot. And so we would, when the canoe was half full of water, we put the canoe on rollers so it was easily rolled, and we rolled it right over top of over that hot earth. And we covered that canoe in multiple tarps and blankets. And over the course of many hours, that water got really, really hot and started to boil. And when you lift up the tarp, steam would just come pouring out. And so when we had the rollers underneath of that canoe, we had them at the very ends and nothing in the middle. And it was just 34 feet placed over top of that, over that heat. And you could just watch that canoe and the weight of that water, and we were adding stones to that water from that fire pit and reaching down and taking them out and putting them back into that fire. And so over time, the bottom of the canoe dropped down and was nearly touching that flame, and the ends of the canoe went up. And we rolled it back out, and it stayed in that shape.
Wow.
And so that was a very old way of doing things. And so more modernly now, I can do that with propane and a boiler. And so I can do it in a more classroom type setting, rather than having it out in a field kind of thing and being very cautious of that flame. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for explaining.
Yeah.
Okay, we have some more questions here.
Awesome.
Louise and Sybil would like to know, can you tell us a bit about how you make the skin on a frame canoe?
Absolutely. I just finished one. And so I got commissioned this September to build a skin-on frame canoe. And so to give a little bit of history about that, when I was 15, I built my very first canoe was a skin-on frame. And I used to sleep in it and whatnot. And so the skin on the canoe is, we use more modern materials now, but at one time they would actually use whalebone, and they would actually stitch hides together, and then I think it was seal hides, and actually wrap the seal hides around the whalebone. but more modernly materials, we use spruce, and so real clear, tight grain spruce, and we create our frame, and we stretch a polyester fabric that has a little bit of stretch in it. So sometimes there'll be 90% polyester and then like 10% spandex. Yes, exactly. And so it just has that little bit of stretch in it. And so we'll stretch that frame, stretch that skin over that frame. And that skin, when you go to the cloth store, I forget the name of it, like Fabric Land or something like that, you can get that those designs in any color, design, or shape. It's just amazing the different designs that they have nowadays. And you can even have custom ones made. And so you can stretch those skins over top of those frames. And then you use, there's all just a huge array from, I describe them as A, B, and C in resins that you can use. So C quality resins are quite toxic, and they have a strong smell to them. And then there's B grade, which I consider epoxies, and then A grades, which is it's so non-toxic, it's almost edible. And you can actually have children working with these epoxies because they're soybean based. And so so it also brings up the discussion of viscosity, and each grade of resin has a different viscosity. And so you'll find that the better glues are more thinner and it takes multiple layers, whereas the C grade glue is a very, it's almost like molasses. It's thick. It's and it's also very it's a very absorbent material. So you have to be in a warm shop, and it can't be raining outside, otherwise it will actually absorb all the humidity within the air. So it's you got a little bit more restricted.
Okay, we have one more question.
Awesome.
Or perception, and they want to know if their perception is correct. It's from Frida again, and she said, it sounds like canoes are spiritual vessels, as well as practical ones, or things for races. Although maybe races are spiritual activities as well. Is this an accurate perception?
Absolutely. And so as I described before about how cedar is it's a living organism, and it absorbs every word you speak. It absorbs those energies that you feel. You never step into a canoe shed with bad feelings or pain, because that pain, even if you don't speak it, that cedar is absorbing those feelings. And it's when a paddler is training to learn how to be a canoe racer, they're learning those exact same protocols, that they can't carry those energies, and they fast for days in order to get those clear visions about each stroke and how timed and rhythm it is. It's a very mind and body and soul cleanse. Yeah.
Yeah, to further expand on that is that the spiritual part is so much a part of our everyday life that we have to keep our minds ready, prepared all the time in case that opportunity comes to help someone, or as in my case, planning for my tours and everything. I can't allow myself to drift away from that. I have to always be alert and be aware of that. And when riding in a canoe or working on a canoe, it's the same kind of energies, putting out that positive energies to have a positive outcome of it, because the cedar is affected by how our feelings are. And so hoping not to scare anyone, but to bring a little bit of awareness to it, that it is a very a full involvement in our spirit and our physical being, as our races are, as our carving is, a lot of that. Even as in my weaving and doing my weaving, it is a very involved process in our cultural way to be respectful in every way we can. Hope that doesn't raise too many more questions. Yeah, but maybe it's good.
I do have one question. It's a cultural question. And Anne would like to know if Dave, if you could pronounce how to say the name for the Elder Cedar Nature Reserve. She has it spelled out here, but I'm not going to attempt it.
Can you spell it out and I can?
S'(UL)-HWEEN X'(PEY).
Oh, no, that's a tough one. Some of them, if I see them, if I'm standing in front of the sign, I could spell it out, but here I can't quite build it though. Yeah, maybe I'll come and look. Salhuain, our elders. Salhuain Pe is our elders' cedar. And that's what it is called, the elder cedar, isn't it? Yeah, Salhuain means our elders. Pe means red cedar. And that's the cedar that is all of our area here is red cedar. Very few trees are yellow cedar, although right by the ferry, there's 2 yellow cedar trees. When we were waiting for the ferry, we were looking, hey, there's 2 yellow cedar trees, which is rare here by the ocean. So Salhuain is our elders. We say, Ichawayel Salhuain, how are you, our elders, when we're speaking to our elders? That's where we would use that, Salhuain. Okay.
So I think this might be a good time to take a little break to give Dave and Beau time to get a little drink of water and maybe check on Beau's baby girl. 6 weeks old. She's 6 weeks old. He's a brand new daddy. And we're going to invite Ardith Cooper to come up for just a few words to talk about her presentation next week. And if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat box. Well, thank you so much for coming today, Ardith, and joining us with this presentation. And we'd like to know a little bit about your presentation next week.
I'm the commercial break.
Yeah, we're a commercial break for sure.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ardith Cooper. I'm a resident.
Ardith, you can just.
Oh. Hi, everybody. My Indian name is Kamchatsya. I'm originally from Sauk, from Souk on southern Vancouver Island, and I have made my home here on Gabriola for over 20 years now. And I want to say hello to my many friends. I know I recognized your names earlier as you showed up. Thank you for being here. What I want to talk about next week is my experience, and that revolves around being an Indigenous woman. I grew up in the 50s into the 60s, and one of the things that was very, very noticeable as a young woman was it's going to sound a little technical, but was the inequality under the Indian Act. And that I realize now overlay my entire developing years, because under the Indian Act, Indian women were treated differently from Indian men. And it was horrific to me at the time, but I realize in retrospect that it was a gift in some ways, because it made me, from my small home in Souk, very aware of inequality. And that's actually been a fundamental in my life, is being aware of inequality and trying to deal with inequality when I see it. And that stems from what we called Section 12(1)(b) of the Indian Act and the partially remedying legislation, C-31, which came into force in 1985. And so my interest in that area brackets that period of time from 1969 as a young woman into 1985, when part of my adult struggle was the work to change that section of the Indian Act. So that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. I also, as a longtime resident now, or probably a short-time resident of Gabriola terms, want to share with you my vision for how I would like to see Gabriola further acknowledge the Snuneymuxw presence here. My mother was Snuneymuxw, and I have my cousin Dave Bodaly to thank for continually educating me on my mom's side of the family. So this is just another step. This is another step in that process of awareness for me. So I look forward to seeing you all next week, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ardith. It was fantastic to have you here and give us a little sneak peek into what we can expect next week. We'll be back here again at 1 o'clock on Monday, the 23rd. So I think Dave and Beau are ready to come back and wrap things up about Cedar Canoes. Thank you.
I'm always honored when I get to work with artists, as we had worked many years ago together within the same organization. And when I first, I didn't know at that time that she had lived over here after that. And about 3 years ago, I was at a gathering here, and they asked if there was any questions, and artist stood up and introduced herself and said she had a question. And I said, hey, I used to know an artist, Cooper, 20 years ago. I wonder if she knows her. Not knowing it was the same person. Yeah. And when I even first seen you, said, I think artist said, that was me. Oh, it was this, I didn't see that in my mind right away, but it just brought a little bit of humor when we first met, and it was a real honor now to share more of her history of her family connections to my family. So thank you for everyone for tuning in, or hoping there were some more questions if there isn't. But this has been a really wonderful opportunity for us to share stories. And I really appreciate Beau sharing his stories too, because of his experience of working with his grandfather. And now when he tells of his grandfather's great-great-grandmother was a sister to my great-great-grandfather. In our cultural way, there's no limit on how far back we can track our history or how far we're related. Similar with artists, her great-great-grandmother is from the descendant of my great-grandfather's brother. So we have always an ancestral connection. And because I work as a genealogist, I'm always easy to put those family trees together as part of my work. I'll share a little bit more of that on when I have my time on the last week of this month, on the last Monday. But for today, thank you so much for learning. And I think there's someone has a question. So.
Libby would like to know more. We haven't talked about paddles so much. She would like to know more about how you make the paddles.
Awesome. Good. Wonderful. Yeah. And so as we described about how we use yellow cedar, and we also use maple, but we always, when we're carving a paddle, we always make sure that it comes from the heartwood, that we're not using the sapwood from that tree. And the reason why that is, and another thing that I brought up too about the north and the south side of the tree. And so there's a few factors that go into paddle making. We want that paddle to have tight grain, and we always want it to, when we paddle or make a paddle, it's just like making a mask or other regalia. It's very balanced. It's almost a mirror image of the other side. And so each paddle, when I make one for an individual, I actually take their body measurements. It's not just a standard size. I have paddles that are meant just for me, and their blade size and also the length of their handle, so that it's comfortable to pull with. So that's a little bit of about paddles. And so, yeah, so we try and keep it, and also they're very light. When I make a yellow cedar paddle, it's almost like a feather. It's just, and I use red cedar for the handle. Yeah.
One thing that I was wondering when there was that one video, I believe it was one of the first canoes that you had made, and you talked about your joinery experience, and you said they were seats. They did not look like seats to me. They looked very skinny. Do you just lean against them, or? Yeah, so reds, especially in the racing canoes, you actually sit right on the bottom of that canoe, and traditionally they used red cedar. And so when I was a live-in apprentice with my teacher, every year dozens of canoes would come to us with all the backrests broken. And on the tribal journeys, when all the canoes would come ashore, people and families would run over to our canoe shed. Are you guys still working during this time? And yeah, we're working. That's why we're here. We're open to the public, and we're open to you, and for any healing that your canoes might need. And there was times when a journey canoe would come up, and every single backrest was broken, and they were having to sit on the tribal journey with their just holding themselves up while pulling. And you really need a backrest while you're pulling, because you're putting a lot of pressure, and to be able to have something to lean on while you're pulling on. And so it's the same within a single. Even though you're sitting flat on the bottom of that canoe, your back is still braced up against something, so you have something to pull against. So it's a backrest. Okay, interesting.
And so the reason where the backrests are where they are, it balances that canoe. It's not just placed anywhere. That backrest is set back from the center line, so that when you're sitting in the canoe, that canoe sits level. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
I'll just ask one more time if anybody has any questions. I think Dave has a few words for us, but just in case anyone has questions and you're a little shy, just put them in the chat box and we'll share them. Oh, Ardith has a question.
I'm curious about whether or not you've ever run across times when you thought you had a great log and it wasn't, and what you have to do in that situation.
Just in case everybody didn't hear that, Ardith wanted to know if Beau ever runs into a log that looks like a great log, but once he gets into it, it's not a great log.
And so that's a big part of my teachings. And so when a tree gets knocked down and falls into the ocean or falls onto the land, it can get fractured. And so at first, when I first started carving, I didn't know to look for these things. And my papa would teach me, but he would also allow me to just go ahead and start, and so that he could walk me through that process. And so many of my canoes, especially in my earlier canoe carving stages, I would start carving a canoe, and there would be a big section of rot or a big section where the ants had gotten into it. And as I'm carving it, he would tell me just to continue carving, just almost ignore all of that rot. And so as I shaped the canoe, sometimes it'd be a giant hole 5 feet long, all the way along the whole side of the canoe. You know, it actually fit a patch that would, and when I'd make that patch, I would actually use some of the wood from that log so that the grain matched and it was the same color. And you would almost wouldn't be able to tell that that was a patch, because it would be running in the same direction and it would be in the same color. Yeah.
Interesting. I would never have guessed that you patched dugout canoes. That's fantastic.
Almost like a puzzle piece.
How do you make it work? Like, how is it assembled?
So it's got a compound joint on it, you could almost call. So instead of being square, I'll actually cut it so it's on almost a 45, so that when I put that piece in, there's lots of, what we're looking for is the most amount of gluing surface to glue to. And so just having something square, where the dugout canoes are a 1/2 inch thick. So just think of how thin I have to get those single canoes. And the bigger the canoe, the thicker those canoes get. So if I'm working on like the one I'm working on at my shop, 40 feet long, when I thin it down, it's going to be between 1.5 inches and 1.75 inches. So there's a lot more gluing surface there, but I still cut it on that 45-degree angle. When I received that log, it didn't have a head or a tail. So I actually had to, which means that it looked like a canoe, but this was missing from it.
Mhm.
And it was just wide open. There was no ends on it. It was just sitting wide open and so I actually had to take a big log and buck it up and to shape it into those shapes. And then I cut it out in 45 so that it had maximum gluing surface, and attached those and glued them together. And then I fit what's called knees inside that canoe, and they go along the keel and ride up the inside of the tail and the head, and then they actually get bolted right in.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So there's as a craftsman, you're always trying to find a way to repair things, and to the point where the people don't even know that it's been fixed.
Yes. Yes. That's the same in many disciplines.
Yes. Yeah.
I know mistakes. Remember when I'm weaving, if there's someone had the other day was weaving a headband, and one of the strands they were weaving broke, and they wanted to know how can they fix that. And so I just weave a new strand into it and continue, and then come back and snip that off after. So it can be done. It's better having the skills and how to do that. So. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, that was, so hopefully that gave some good information about Beau's work that he's done. And then again, our studio is at 2300 Bowen Road, the Red Barns, and Arts Collaborative is the name of our company there. But we are going to be coming back, and I'll be sharing more at the end of the month after artist's speech. Then I'll share more about some of the work that I'm doing here within Gabriola Island and within the Nanaimo or Snuneymuxw area. So on behalf of Snuneymuxw, we thank you for coming and tuning in. And I'm real honored to have this series. Thanks to Carol for organizing this, and all the organizers too, to put it together and everything. Heichka for being here. And they always, my elders have always told me, when we thank everyone, please remember that these stories are Snuneymuxw stories out of respect for our people. So big Heichka to all the organizers and participants that coming in. So thank you again.
I'm just gonna, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, in times of COVID, I don't know we're supposed to.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to see you next week for Artist Cooper's presentation, and then on November 30th for Dave Bodaly's presentation. And until then, have a lovely November afternoon.